We're trying to translate something inherent and essential about what it is to have a human experience, something that's been put aside and put to sleep. And our words are merely clumsy attempts to get those to look again and to reawaken our connection with that. So coming in at the grassroots place with practices that afford us the cognitive flexibility to be able to sense ourselves in the mythic sense as well as the intellectual sense, to take our modern capacity to understand and reason to pull those other things forward in a way that's satisfying to our whole being.
I'm so excited to introduce the 360 Degrees Human podcast, a holistic loudspeaker that's normalizing what it means to live into your whole being. I'm Gina Levy, founder of 360 Degrees Human and your podcast host. Each episode is a holistic masterclass explored through natural conversations and storytelling that intend to uncondition and re-educate, inspire and empower. Here you'll meet my network of paradigm-shifting life champions, movement magicians, mind maestros, soul food farmers, well-being coaches, spiritual teachers, nature wanderers, and humanpreneurs who'll make it easy for you to integrate holism into your daily life so you can live whole and happily ever now. That's why this isn't an interview, it's an education in living whole, in real time, from exactly where you are. So what does your best day look like? And what if it was every day? Hey everybody, welcome back to the 360 Degrees Human podcast and another phenomenal guest. You can't miss him. He's otherworldly. He comes barefoot and wrapped in tattoos with encyclopaedic knowledge about how and why we move. He's a wizard, a shaman, and a modern-day ancient world philosopher. He's a visionary of living anatomy, movement, embryology, fascial research, mythology, wonder, and magic. Quite simply, he's a true original. While others are hashtagging handstands or crow pose, he's hashtagging Soma-naut, psychedelic movement, Tao of the body, Unlearning, sailing gravity, elephant trunk, and spiderman fingers. Meet Carlos Tao, who's on a quest to awaken us to a return to wonder, to the intelligence of the body in motion, and what it means to be alive. His teachings on the secret of human movement are not a practice, a method, or a technique, but an experience, because the truth is found in experiencing yourself as you really are. While he travels around the world offering workshops, trainings, and experiences in both English and Spanish, not one class is the same, and no one description is enough. He is like the flirt he describes, ever-changing and finding new connections and pathways, constantly reframing and refining his art. Speaking to Carlos is like liftoff for my spirit. His innate embodiment of magic is so acute that it bounces off the cosmos and into my bones. I believe this conversation will radically transform the way you see, feel, and move forever. Know one thing, this is going to be a magical ride, so get ready. I am so happy that you're finally here in my hometown. I remember very clearly when we first met. It was in 2017, and I had come to do some courses and workshops in traditional Chinese medicine, Qigong, and yoga for about 2 months in Bali. I didn't even know about you when I booked. In fact, you didn't even appear on any studio's marketing sites when I researched. But when you showed up one day, out of nowhere, I felt like I'd found my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I knew in the first 5 minutes of the first class that this was unlike any movement practice I'd ever experienced before. And I've moved my whole life across multiple disciplines and styles in dance, yoga, sport, martial arts, and everything in between. You really followed no tradition or style, and you used your own made-up movements and language and mythology to reference other worlds. You kind of contained something magical I could identify with in a certain tongue that I could understand, with this like twinkle of childlike innocence and wonder I could relate to. I recognized you immediately as my kindred spirit, and I knew instantly that you had much to teach, reteach, and remind me of. Carlos, I was like a moth to a flame. I mean, I don't think I left your side. I couldn't believe that you were undiscovered, but I knew straight away that you were destined to make a huge dent in the world of movement and yoga. Not only did I want to know the magical formula, but I wanted to share you with everyone I knew back in South Africa and beyond. And I finally convinced you to come to Cape Town for Spirit Fest, our local Bali Fest, back in February 2020, just before COVID. And now I have the privilege of having you on my podcast so I can fulfill my promise of sprinkling and spreading your magic. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for those 2 kind words. I can't believe it's been that many years already that we've been trying to get to this moment, I think.
Yeah, but we made it. So I wanted to start with you at the beginning. There's very little public information about you or your life before you embarked on this mystical journey, even though I know that it wasn't always this way. So can you tell us about the evolution from Carlos Sanchez to Carlos Tao?
To me, that's the least interesting
We're gonna get more interesting, of course.
It was a more subtle transition than people realize. It wasn't one big moment of anything, really. It was a continuation of a quest that I felt early on. It went through different stages. Movement wasn't my first love at all. Philosophy, I think, was a doorway, and questioning and wonder and curiosity and a dissatisfaction with the answers. The questions were always more intimate to me, and the answers felt like strangers. That was the beginning of something, and that took many, many, many forms. It's evolved over time. It evolved from being within very, very traditional religion early on. I was an altar boy, so I was
Hard
deeply,
to believe.
I know. This is what being an altar boy will do to you after a while,
exactly.
if you don't watch out. It evolved from that into a disillusionment with that, into an attempt to ease the ache and the longing in different ways with psychedelics, and at least was different enough from the answers that were not nourishing that it became an obsession in a sense. It was touching into another world from a very beautiful intention to wanting to re-enchant our understanding of who we are and what existence is. But going through that path, the cost is extremely high. That led down a 10-year darkness of getting further and further away from or disconnected from a mythos or an understanding of the world that spread out in both directions. So even during that time, even during the addiction and the disconnection with reality, there was still this unfolding that seemed to be happening within that, which was, it's almost unpopular to say something like that there was some kind of benefit to being in this darkness, but there truly was. The problem was that the cost was so high. The cost was so high, and it wasn't a meta understanding. And when I say meta, I mean an understanding or a vision that moved in 2 directions, that was able to go this way, but also really ground into this world, into the material world, and into society in a way that it afforded me a capacity to share the understanding and to continue to move forward with it. It was the amount of life that I was paying for the insights that I was having became more and more cost for less and less insight, to the point that something had to give. And the darkness of that, and when I was able to get away from that and overdoses and different things that happened, there was a sadness of letting go of the wonder of that world for the mundane. And at that point, you deal with enough pain. And I think that's part of what we're going to. I'm not sure if I had put this together in this way, but we'll trade away wonder for a sense of security. So it was, I can push wonder away. I can push the bigness of the world as it appeared from these states for just a feeling of some kind of comfort, just for a feeling of maybe I won't die today. And there was a moment of relief from that. But then there was one path laid out, and the path was to go back fully into the mundane, to almost make affirmations that what I had done, what I had been through was bad and should be moved to the side, and to come back in line. So while it pulled me away from that world and afforded me a sense of health and safety, it also, again, that darkness started to build of, okay, does it have to be one or the other? So I delved deeply into as many books as I could, as many different paths, traditions, passive liberation, freedom traditions, ancient and modern. So I joke around now that, that I'd be a Buddhist for a couple weeks, read everything I can get my hands on, and figure out that there was big holes in what that was or what that offered, I thought. And then I'd be Taoist for a while, and then maybe Zoroastrianism, and then a Kabbalist, and then a Christian mystic, and whatever it was that I can get my hands on to read in an attempt to find the portal, find the holy grail of something that was going to in a way, try to connect this and deal with this sense of domicide, the sense of loss of home, of an inability to place myself within the bigness of the wonder and the reality of everyday life. And from that place, I'm taking big jumps, but from that place, I had some kind of insight that just the intellectual aspects of what I was doing weren't enough. I wasn't finding, no book seemed to have this. So I don't even think it was rationally or linearly thought out, but I decided that maybe yoga or Tai Chi or something physical was an option, or maybe a way to fill in these gaps and kind of embody this understanding. And it really wasn't anything specific that drew me to something like yoga. It was between yoga and Tai Chi, which were the two things that had some sense of magic to them in the way people would move. Tai Chi was harder to find where I was. There was a yoga training within, I think 2 weeks from when I had that thought. So yoga was the more lubricated path, the more well-worn path, in that I had taken one yoga class, and it wasn't a good one, before I decided to take a training. And I think now, and it's still words are clumsy, they always are, but it was this sense of something in me is trying to say something, and it's not there yet in a sense, or why would anyone, including myself, listen to this? Like, something else needs to be there, some kind of platform needs to be there in order for whatever it is that's playing inside me to find its way out. So I took a yoga training. It was fine. I was the most remedial person in that room. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't hold a lunge. I couldn't do any kind of twisting without falling over. I knew nothing about the lingo or the language of it. Everybody seemed much further along than I did. I had notebooks, and I would write lines in Sanskrit to try to memorize what all of these things were. But I stayed with it. I understood. I enjoyed the movement, the challenge, the physical challenge of it. I understood, in a sense, some of what they were trying to say with the philosophy, but there was still this huge gap between the physical practices that was being delivered and this incredibly vast amount of philosophy that not even the person that was trying to teach me seemed to have a grip on. So again, this wasn't a completion of anything. I ended up hoping that I would kind of figure this out one day if I put on the right outfits and I spoke the right way and I memorized the right things, that somehow this would make sense at some point. Very gratefully, in some kind of grace, I ended up going to a class with a teacher, a young guy who was about 10 years younger than me at the time. And in his class, not a lot of heavy philosophy, not a lot of history about anything, but just in the way that he had us move our bodies. There was an experience at the end of that was fascinating to me, that something else seemed to become available in that moment, in the way that I was thinking and feeling, and some kind of cohesion started to happen within the ideas, nothing that I could quite put into words yet and wrestle down into the verbal communication, but something sparked. And wanted to know what this was, because this seemed to have an inkling of possibly what they were talking about in the ancient books and in the ancient stories about this kind of physical access to something more, to a deeper way of seeing, of understanding. So I began to follow him around. We were teaching in the same studio, but I was completely out of my element. I didn't know enough to teach. I knew that. And I was terrified of public speaking. I needed to put on this big persona with all of this energy and work myself up almost into this frenzy in order to teach. And what I would do is I'd go to his classes and I'd try to write down exactly what he said, because I knew if I could just like capture exactly the words that he would use, that I can get people to feel something, to start to touch into these places. So I would go after classes with him and I would have my notebook and I would ask him, be like, well, you said this. So what do I do with this? And he would graciously answer my questions, and I would take these questions home and I would do what he said, and I would practice and I would try to get within this experience. And then I would go the next time and I would be like, well, you said this, but when I do this, this happens. What do you think? And again, I would write down. I'd just be studying his words. And as he would tell the story later on, I thought I was bothering him. I felt bad and I felt guilty about, constantly annoying this guy. And he was smiling. And the reason that he was smiling is that he was saying that as time went on, my questions were getting better and better, and his ability to answer them were getting less and less. So there was a shift somehow. And
the student became the teacher.
In a sense, it was more of a fellowship where we were being more in dialogue with these questions. And I didn't, again, this is me looking back now. Unbeknownst to me, he was already had it in his mind that we would be working together. And, he invited me to take over his classes when he wasn't there. And I sat in on a teacher training because I begged him, can I just sit in the back? I won't bother anybody. I'll just stay there quietly. Let me know when I can just come in like a mouse, And the day that he's like, okay, well, you can come tomorrow if you'd like. I went in there and I sat in the back all quietly, and he called me over. He's like, no, sit here. And he had me sit next to him. And as the thing went on and the training went on, he broke everybody up into groups. And at one point he told me, he's like, well, you take that group and take care of them. And we ended up teaching together, developing what eventually became known as fluidist together. I would work with him. His father and his sister worked with spinal injuries and were surgeons. So he was working on some of the recovery rehabs for them. And I would work with him, and that became another area of exploration of how we were moving people's bodies within a practice and what was going on within these more difficult situations. And that started to give us more and more insight about where to go forward. I started traveling to find who his teachers were and spending some time with them and basically questioning them. And what started to happen is that the blind spots became more and more obvious. The places that we would only go back so far, even within the teachers, until the point that the answer was, well, I don't know. That's just what I was taught. And I could only go back so far where there was this chasm of the unknown and the holes where the understanding of why we were doing certain things seems to have been lost. And again, there was still these holes between what the philosophy was and how we were asking people to move. And again, filling out those holes over time became this hero's journey in a sense, this quest. And no medical training, no real philosophical training for me. So since no one could answer my questions, for some reason, I refused to let that go and began to research and practice and write about what I was experiencing within the movement and seeing if I could find someone, whatever modality at this point it was, whether it was within the medical establishment, within other movement practices, psychology, anthropology, physiology, whatever it was. But since I couldn't read, I would get these texts, and I would sit down to read these texts. And then I realized I can't read this text. I don't have the understanding to read this text, so I'd have to put that text to the side, find something else that would teach me how to read this one. Couldn't read that one, so I had to go back far enough where I could read something that would teach me how to read the next thing, that would teach me how to read the next thing. And over time, this started to fill in some of the gaps, fill in some of the holes, and started to develop an understanding, or at least a theory of what may be happening. And again, that's where fluid has started to take on a different shape of trying to fill that hole, where we started to bring in psychology, philosophy, linguistics, human development, mythology, and seeing where's the through line, where's the intersection of all of this, where's the place where phenomenological truth and objective truth intersect. I think that's a long story, semi-short, on what at least got me to the place of having this thing be something that seemed like it was more than me at this point, where it was no longer anything that I was doing, but it seemed like something that had always been there, that we were starting to be able to translate and doing our best to, again, put words to this thing that was out there. And I think my ignorance was the biggest gift, since I didn't know. Not only did I know, I also didn't know what I shouldn't do, or what questions not to ask, or who not to offend. So the purity of my ignorance, in a sense, afforded me the ability to ask the questions that were bad form, in a sense, that you don't ask. So not knowing any better, I would ask, and I wasn't easily dissuaded by superficial answers. In a simple way, I could say that that's led to this.
Wow. I didn't know that. I mean, not to that extent. It's such a beautiful way of looking at the world. I mean, you often use the term, I've heard you say, we are kids pretending to be adults, because we very rarely walk through this life with that sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness. We are kind of traditionally taught to absorb information and not necessarily to distill it. So through that process of, I suppose, self-inquiry, that is the thing that leads us to new frontiers, you know? It's kind of like saying, I suppose, the earth is flat. No, actually, time goes on, it's actually round. And then we get to believe that the earth is round. And it's only through particular individuals who stand up and question society, because it is society at large. I mean, you're talking about ancient texts of different lineages, of different traditions and modalities that, you know, I often feel like there are these fly-by-night teachers who don't go through this process. And it's a very fine line, because, you know, that can take the magic and mystery away from someone who could have been going in that direction. So I can completely relate, because I've also had a very convoluted path. It started off quite traditionally, studying architecture, but then it went through so many different journeys. And if I think back on it, so many of the things that I started, I had absolutely no idea about. Mine was generally through seeing something in the world that I just couldn't resonate with, and felt that it was unjust, or there was a sense of frustration around it, and wondering, well, I'm sure there's a solution, you know, and then my problem-solving nature would just kick in. And I, you know, instead of necessarily like producing a building at the end of it in bricks and mortar, there'd be some kind of other response to that, and go, well, what about this idea? Or what about this program or this platform? And, you know, and then enabling others to have the same process of inquiry, but within their own means or creativity, I should say. So there is something really beautiful about that innocence and not knowing. And I think that it also makes other people quite receptive to it, because you're coming from such a fresh perspective. You're not asking the same questions, and that is quite refreshingly challenging for them. So I can understand. And you're speaking about your very close friend now. Please just remind me of his name.
Sure. Yeah, his name is Jason Lahner, or I can say is or was. He passed away very recently, just a few weeks ago. He passed away, and not in a tragic way, in a sense. It was a ski accident, but I mean, he was the epitome of living life. He was Devin, my partner, talks about him as kind of this ultimate archetype of balance, where he had this deep but simple spiritual practice, this deep connection to himself, and also completely within the world. So this beautiful bridge of that, and it's what he loved to do. He loved to climb, he loved to ski, he loved to hike and camp. And I mean, that's the last thing that he was doing within the thing that he loves. But yeah, He was my younger big brother, in a sense. Yeah, he was my younger big brother.
I'm so sorry about that. I know that it's very raw and recent.
Yeah.
But I also think that there is a legacy and a paying it forward in what you're doing now. And maybe you knew all of that was in preparation for some kind of eventuality, I suppose. And I probably think that because of your outlook already being the way that it is, you are able to understand another dimension already, and that there's a comfort in that many people don't necessarily have.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said, and I think one of the issues is I just prefaced the word domicide, where it's like, homicide and domicile. So domicide is like this death of home. What we've lost our mythic center, a way to appropriately place ourselves in existence in a way that not only makes material sense, but it makes emotional sense, that it goes along with the inner sense of ourselves, instead of just this idea, this Cartesian idea, when there was like this schism or this split where we left the superstitions, and I'm putting that in quotations because I don't think that we realized what we were doing when we did that. There was a lot that needed to be refined and refreshed and have ourselves released from the control of. But in a sense, we threw the baby out with the bathwater when we did that within our Cartesian split, where we split mind and material, and the father of science, we ended up going down this reductionist path where these old stories, these myths, since the rituals that we had were seen as childlike and unnecessary, without use, and instead of just getting rid of the control and the pathology of some of the things that were going on, there's been an attempt over the last, I don't know how many 100 years, to get rid of all of that. And what we did, in a sense, is we got rid of a deep part of ourselves, in a misunderstanding of what myth is. A myth is something that's not necessarily true in detail, but is deeply true in pattern, intergenerationally. So this is intergenerational wisdom about who we are, about our relationships with existence, with our own emotions, with our sense of self, with something like birth and death, and who we are. Those things have been wrestled with for thousands and thousands of years, and that wisdom that was trying to be put forward, it was pushed off to the side, and what we're left with now is a world that's extremely comfortable in a relative sense. We've never been more comfortable. We've never been more rich. Again, it's not to say that there aren't people that struggle deeply, but if we're looking at it as a complete package, it's the most resourced, rich, technological, knowledge-filled world that has ever been. And it's also the most meaningless world, in a sense. People feel more and more disconnected, more and more aching and longing for the sense of themselves. So the richer we are, the more resources we have, this sense of disconnection has actually grown, which is troubling. Some extremely beautiful people are discussing this as the meaning crisis, that we have a meaning crisis going on, this domicide and this meaning crisis, where we no longer know how to place ourselves outside of the reductionist model, outside of the get the next thing model, and that satisfies a certain part of ourselves, but we're distracting ourselves from these other big questions as if they're unimportant. And they're not unimportant. I mean, we have funny modern words for something like midlife crises. Well, what is that? That's basically what you've been aiming at for so long, all of a sudden loses that sense of fulfillment for you. Because at the beginning, you don't know any better, so you think it's coming. You go to school, well, you graduate, you go to the next level. You graduate, you go to the next level. You graduate, you go to university. Well, okay, what's next? Well, you graduate university, maybe you go to higher education. Okay, what's next? Well, now you get a job. Okay, what's next? Now you get promoted. Okay, what's next? You get promoted a little further. Okay, what's next? You get to the top of your field. Okay, I'm here. Well, now you wait for retirement. You start to realize that you felt pretty much the same when you got to the top of your field than you felt 20 years before. Like nothing big has happened. You don't feel any more full of meaning. Like those things inside you haven't been satisfied in any real way. And now you have this other part of like, I've invested so much in this life, in this story, and now I've gotten here, and it's not satisfying to me. Something in me is still vacuous and empty. And then we try to do different things to fulfill that. We can go off to a place like Bali and go try to fill that up with a spiritual materialism in a sense, which is funnily what ends up happening a lot of times, because we take the same patterns that we had from within that other world and we try to superimpose them on the spiritual. So now it becomes about, well, how many workshops have I done? How spiritual do I look? How many people love me? How many, am I wearing the right clothes? How many books have I read? How long can I meditate for? And again, we get to that same place because it's the pattern underneath, that the vision of ourselves, that mythic center that's not being addressed. The proper placement, the ratio religio. Religio means binding, ratio in a sense of ratio, of this proportionate binding of ourselves to present, the future, and the past, to myself as a material being, to the sense of myself as this mythic creature of consciousness, and the sense of myself within the infinitude of reality, and to properly proportion these things. And I think that ratio has been off balance. And fundamentalism is in a sense that crash back of trying to fill that hole from the same place, but it becomes the same idea where we're trying to fill ourselves with menus. We're eating menu after menu after menu and wondering why we're not getting satisfied the way that we would by a meal.
So I align very much with you when it comes to this unlearning model, because I also feel that it's taken us in a direction that is, in your words, unnatural. And, so that it completely leads down that path of dissatisfaction. And also disposability. I don't know if you remember way back when, and I showed you this program that I was doing at UCT called Upstart, and there was a video basically animating exactly what you've just described, and how we are designed to almost fall off that conveyor belt at some time and at some point and get replaced, unless we actually look within and understand what is our purpose here. What is our passion? Who are we? And ask these really important questions that we generally bypass en route to qualifying as something or from something and getting a title and a job description. We forget to, play more in nature. We forget to kind of reconcile this external world with the internal world. And it's because we don't have this wonder curriculum, in a sense, which should be common knowledge. Because if it was common knowledge, then we wouldn't necessarily have to go and tap on other people's doors to help heal us, to help redirect us and all these kind of things, because we'd go through these experiences as opposed to this dogmatic information that kept coming at us versus us going through more of a questioning process. And I know that there are schools, different schools of inquiry, and, I suppose the Waldorf types, those that have now progressed even further or used that as a starting point and found different ways to integrate this knowledge better through more of an experiential learning. But it's very few and far between. It's certainly not mainstream. And so how do you feel, because we sitting, for example, in inverted commas, in your school and learning this information, whenever I'm in a class of yours, I watch other people who've never had this information before, and just like the light bulb goes off, because you realize that it's so innate. I mean, you almost kind of go, obviously, in a way, but that information is so out of one's reach that you have to have someone reignite it for you, which is what you do. But that's in a small, closed, contained environment. So how do you think this kind of knowledge becomes much more widespread?
It's going to take some time. The reason that I say that is, let me give you an example. There's a difference between a transformational experience and a quote-unquote ordinary experience or transcendental experience and an ordinary experience. And you can think of ordinary experiences being in this horizontal plane where we're riding the same line, and we can improve, but we're basically gonna improve in just one direction. We're gonna get better at the same world that we're in increments. It's not gonna afford us to do anything truly different. We're just gonna move along this one line where it's better in quantity but not necessarily in quality. So so someone's sense of contentedness will be a little better. And that's the world that we're in. So my concern, even when you were speaking about these others that are working from within this inquiry, you're talking about the system itself as it is, giving us ways of being slightly more content within the system itself. So what's necessary? We can think about it this way: if we all had rose-colored glasses on and looking through the rose-colored lenses, as much as we squint, we're going to see everything rose-colored, and we could have ideas about what this is, and we can have abstract thoughts about what blue might be like, but we're only going to be able to look through these frames. So what transformational experiences are is a way of affording us access into a vertical perspective, a vertical shift, where we're not just moving along the same axis, but there's this moment of inspiration or transcendence that affords us this leap out of our everyday framing, and that's what's not happening, and that's what's I don't even believe that it's happening within those that are on the edges, trying to make education a little bit better from within more or less the same model, because if you go too far, there's too much of a reaction, no one's going to back you, and all of these practical reasonings for this. So my concern is that some bigger shift in this is going to need to happen. True to what you said, we're not taught to think. We're not taught to question. The humanities are no longer taught. I work with this gentleman, this British gentleman, Tommy, and Tommy is a storyteller. He travels the world and he collects these ancient myths, and he leads these retreats and these workshops where they flesh out these stories over a weekend's time or a week's time, and you dream with these stories, and this is storytelling for transformation more than it is for information. Again, these stories, these old myths, were trying to take us to a place inside of ourselves that was not so easily stated in our linear world and our linear understanding and these small mouth sounds that we've overglorified in our verbal language. And these stories had that capacity to transmit wisdom, and I'll use wisdom in the sense of rationality. And I'll use rationality in the sense, again, of this rationing, this putting ourselves appropriately. It's not just how much information I have. That's not wisdom. It's where do I place this information? What does this information do to me? Like, where do I put myself within the hierarchy of the world? What's relevant to me? What pieces of the information and knowledge are useful now, and which pieces are irrelevant to me right now? So when we say wisdom and rationality, that's what's missing. We're overloaded with information already, like knowledge on tap, literally knowledge on tap. At the push of a finger, we have any child, even in a third world country that has some kind of smartphone, has access to more information than the president of the United States had in the 80s. I mean, that's ridiculous. But we have no capacity to use that in a real way, in a way that affords us this transcendental wisdom that we're talking about. So this idea that what we need to know how to do is we need to know how to think. We need to understand ourselves in the Socratic thought of know thyself. It's not know thyself like know your history. It's know thyself like know how you think. Know how you see things, know why you see things. It's the capacity to not just look through the lenses, but it's the capacity to be able to look at the lenses, to understand that we're seeing through filters, to understand that we're already seeing through something. And again, those kinds of things afford us this leap out of the horizontal and into the vertical, where now things can be placed in a different way. So even within these experiences, I think it's a step in the right direction. But again, my concern is the absorption of these things by culture, and even in the ways that we talk about them, about saying, you're going to have workers that are better for you. So basically telling the system, hey, it's okay to let them do this because you're going to get people that are going to be more efficient, and you're going to be able to go on with the world, and your workers are going to be better, and your profit margin is going to be better, and your ROI, your return on investment is going to be better. We're still playing within the horizontal. We're still playing within this dimension, and these things have a tendency to get absorbed by culture. Culture is like a moving freighter on the ocean. It's not going to change easily. And you hinted at something when you said it's outliers on the edges that start to flick. It was the job of, in the old courts, it was the job of the jester, the joker, to constantly be in the king or queen's ear. And it was like the one person in the court that wouldn't get beheaded for saying the wrong thing. It was in service of the court. It was in service of the court that this one, whenever the king or the queen or the politicians got too high and mighty, for someone in the ear to say, it's like, you're not really believing all this stuff, are you? You're not taking yourself that seriously, are you? This is a joke. So that offense in the service of the mythic is something that frighteningly we're losing right now, where there's this movement to never offend anything, and to have, in response to this over restriction on a deep part of ourselves, the backlash to this, or the elastic response to this, a slingshot in the other direction, has been as pathological as the first date, where, well, my identity is completely into my own hands, where it's like, well, it's just about me and whatever I think, whatever I feel, and that's going to be my God. And again, we're playing at two extremes, and we've lost something there. There's, again, this appropriate rationing and binding to the I that I know, and also the mysterious I that I don't know. So again, where do we place that? The humility of, I know about this much of what I am. So, and then it's a tiny island of knowing in this ocean of mystery about what I am. That who I am goes backwards and forwards through time, in a sense. That I didn't just come out of nothing, or I didn't just come into this world empty. There's a long line of humanity that flows through me, a long line of consciousness that flows through me. There's something about me that's mythical and transcendent, and is not easily reduced into material verbal language. And that's when I hinted earlier that we lost something within the Descartesian split. We need a new mythos that satisfies that mysterium of who we are, but also satisfies our intellect at the same time. So we don't have to sacrifice an aspect of ourself to bring in the other parts of ourselves, and to bring these together in a very real way, and bring these conversations back to teach us how to wrestle with these ideas, to not, like you said, not just, who answers the memorization quickest and best. But it's like, well, you put a question, it's like, well, I don't know yet. I'm going to need to wrestle with this for a while. I'm going to wrestle with this in my life, and within dialogue, to have real dialogue. And real dialogue means that there's some kind of sacred commitment to unveiling something as we speak together, instead of protection of my identity and individual will, where what I'm trying to do is debate and prove my rightness in the face of your rightness. So we're all, in a sense, walking around as fundamentalists, going in there because there's no home. We don't have a connection to this place. So we're all defending like the little corner of ourselves that we're trying like hell to hold on to, because it feels like it's the only thing that's stemming the tide of this existential crisis that's trying to crash down around us. Instead of it being this community that's moving itself closer to wisdom, that we throw ideas into the arena, not because I'm identifying with them, but because through that dialogue, hopefully within this distributed cognition, like your mind and my mind together are better than just my mind. So we get to spread out our understanding. In a sense, that's what culture is meant to be. It's this distributed cognition that goes forward through time with what the ancients had taught us, in a sense. But to be able to, again, bring this back, this dialectic, this dialogos, this ability to commit to dialogue with the effect of both of us becoming more enriched and more wise afterwards, even if that means that either of us or both of us were a little bit offended from the conversation. That's something that I held on to, like my identity is going to have to die in order for something richer to come forward. And I think that's what's been missing. Even these kinds of conversations, like we're not having these kinds of conversations. We're having conversations about what is right and what is wrong, about, whether that story in that ancient book, here's historical documents that prove that detail didn't happen. We're missing something deeply. We're missing myth as intergenerational wisdom, as something true in pattern, that without that, we're taking our fertile soil out from underneath us that had supported us for so long. And now we're floating, and there's a danger because we've gotten so technologically advanced that it's more dangerous for us now to not have a way to properly place ourselves within existence. So that's a struggle. That's the struggle as I see it, to have these conversations come back, to begin to teach people how to think, how to wrestle, how to question, how to have a broader perspective of what myth is, beyond the reductionist idea of whether it was true in detail or not. Because if we think that somehow, let me put it this way, if somehow someone gets rid of all their myths, all their ancient stories, and decides on their own that they're going to take on the questions of consciousness and existence, and they're going to start from scratch, how far can they get? If so many of these ideas had thousands of years of understanding and wrestling and questioning and dialogue and fleshing them out and trying to understand through mythology and through symbology and through all of these things, trying to come to some kind of understanding, that instead of standing on the shoulders of those giants and continuing to move this understanding forward, refining it over and over, letting go of what doesn't make sense, and like gold in the fire, have it be purified over time, that we're going to get rid of all of it and try to create it all from scratch. That's not going to happen. So this new mythos, this new understanding needs to be some kind of bridge between this deep well of mythology and philosophy and wisdom and intelligence from the giants of the ancient world, because they were not dumb. They were as modern in their thinking as we are. They just had less access to information. But we could take what they wrestled with and bridge it with our current understanding, and then see if we can pull that wisdom forward instead of drawing a line in the sand and trying to get rid of it and just focusing on this one aspect of who we are, which, if the evidence continues to show itself, it is nowhere near enough for us to have our full humanity, our full consciousness, our full understanding, the richness that's promised.
That is powerful. I'm sitting here thinking, and I have a lot of questions for you. They're popping out of my head. And, the world as we know it has been designed as it's an economic model. So, and the educational system prepares one for this economic model. And so everything that you're saying actually doesn't necessarily benefit the economic model. And that's what has become very dominant. And those on top are very fearful of the model you describe because they don't want to be questioned. So it's much easier, as we know, to control through fear and to keep people at a certain level where the knowledge that they get is the knowledge that is prescribed. So I'm asking, this is not even it's not my answer necessarily, but if it is about, when you say this process is incremental, I understand that, because it's when there almost has to be a tipping point of outliers in order for the paradigm to shift so that the original model crumbles and a new one is born. Not necessarily a new one to replace it so directly, but one, as you say, is much more all-encompassing. And in my speak, what I say develops you into a whole being, a whole human being, where you are inquiring about every single aspect of you in order to come into this holistic alignment. And when you've accessed that, that is when I do believe that this magic and wonder, as you speak about it, is very accessible. And it doesn't become taboo. And I think that that's the other interesting thing. I mean, way back when, people who believe this were labeled witches and were burned at the stake. And each kind of era has brought its own variety of these kind of individuals who just don't subscribe to society as it's been outlined. And so I think you've just described really in a very powerful and interesting way of almost creating this balance where there's a respect going on between these different ways of thinking. But at the same time, like where you see, you have to have, it's almost like a family, I would say. You can't exist in isolation. Your family is there to provide all these different, call it resources in term, whether it's, shelter and food and all of those kinds of basics, but it's also love and it's compassion and it's friendship and it's learning and it's all of these things. So the same thing at a macrocosmic level is what has really been broken down, I think, over time. It's still the core values that have been broken down, which is why you say that, there are all these kind of, the world seems to be so fragmented in its different. There's just such misalignment within oneself and within each other. And so for you, what does it look like physically, in other words? Because it's one thing to talk about philosophy and say, well, we should have, people just inquiring or whatever, but one actually has to integrate that into a society that can incrementally shift. And there obviously are those, powerful forces that, if we look at it in terms of infrastructure, there are schools, there are universities. I mean, obviously there's online now, and I think that maybe that is the technology you speak of that is springboarding us to a different type of knowledge and wisdom because it's more selective. So how do you foresee this new state of thinking or paradigm or dimension materializing? Or is it what you've created in Fleur-das?
So much there in what you said. Now, at the beginning when you started speaking, you were speaking about people in power, and people in power commit suicide too. If they're human, they're suffering from the same thing. And there's this empty ghost or hungry ghost phenomena where it's not enough. It's like nothing is enough. I mean, once you get to $1 billion, like even a lot less than that, what's the gain to go further than that and again, unless it's unknown. It's like I'm trying to get satisfied. I'm trying to get contentment. I'm trying to fill this whatever it is inside me. And no matter how much I put in myself, I can't get to the other side of that. That's innate in the culture that we're talking about in this idea. And it's a resource economy, but I think we've made a mistake in thinking that we know what's going to satisfy that. And that's been one of the biggest things where, we're given a story from down to top, because these people that are in power now, they didn't just come into a blank world and create this in a sense. They jumped right on that same path underneath the story that was already there. And they're the ones that have run ahead and to try to get as much as they can, but they're still living within that dissatisfaction, and it's pretty obvious. You get a superstar, all the money in the world, fanfare, universally loved, and they're miserable, and there's a deep depression in them. So unfortunately, the evidence is massive around us that it doesn't matter where you get to, what tier you're in within this. After you have a certain amount, basically, your basic needs are met. After that, the amount of satisfaction or happiness or meaning that you get as your salary rises is almost negligible once you get to a certain level. Like, definitely basic needs and medical care and those things are important. But once you move past that, it's definitely not on equal par with the more that I have, the happier that I am. Sometimes it's backwards. You become a prisoner more and more of this thing. So the kind of resources that we're talking about, the kind of fulfillment that we're talking about goes all the way up the line for this. It's going to change one way or the other. Now, if these things have changed throughout time. There's been already, and we can look back through history at moments of these big shifts, the Renaissance, the Descartes split, the axial revolution. If you go back, into the ancient Greek times, these moments where something shifted in the ways that we saw things, that everything else shifted underneath. But it's going to start in a sense. We could imagine it coming from bottom up and top down at the same time, because that's how our cognition works. That's how the world works. But again, this capacity to think, to create what I call an ecology of practices, to fill. It's already happening. The New Age is in direct response to this meaning crisis, this taking away of our stories, to this domicide, and what's going on is a strange fundamentalism in the other direction now, where at the beginning it was, any kind of superstition is strange and we should push that out there, when traditional religion was, the scapegoat for that, where we push all the traditional religions into the corner, and, you can be over there on your little street corner as long as you don't infect our lives with your nonsense. And now we've gone in the other direction, where all this New Age stuff, and people were willing to believe all of these other things to try to connect themselves back into the thing that religion used to fill within their lives, the sense of the contemplation of the infinite, the contemplation of the mystery beyond the unsatisfactory story of the day-to-day that I'm being fed from the consumer culture, which is not satisfying those places in myself. So this is already happening. Go to any bookstore, look at the self-help section and philosophy section. It's not, in my world, that's not philosophy. It's a bastardization, in a sense. It's theurgy, not in the good sense of a modern spell casting in order to try to shift your reality within whatever languages are acceptable in your paradigm. Let's say, 5 steps to enlightenment, 10 steps to a better you. Whatever this is, we can label it as something else. But there's already, if you're looking from the business model, and the customers are already out there clamoring for something that works, and nobody's actually providing anything. So none of the products that are being provided are actually satisfying in a real way the need that's being put out there. And that's the place that we're at. There's a huge vacuum for something meaningful. And right now we're within this horizontal that something else has the opportunity to come in here. It's almost like the ground is fertile for this. Is it going to be easy? No. Is there going to be tough responses? Yes. But the conversations need to start about something different than what we have now. People don't know what they don't know. If this is the only path that they've been giving to contentment and quote unquote happiness, so then they're going to say, because we all have the idea, right? The reason that we stay on this path is because we think that if we get to the next stage, it's going to be there for me. So I think I can get there. Those are the people that defend the system strongly, are the people that are in some kind of state that they still believe that if they get there, that somehow the system has something for them at the end. And that's, even if it's somebody low, as long as they've bought in to this idea, they'll continue to defend this, because they're looking through the lenses. They're within the horizontal. So what we need is a way for them to stand beyond their lenses. And again, this ecology, this idea of ecology of practices, these transformational experiences that afford us ecstasies in the old sense, and ecstasies in the way that you stand beside yourself, in a sense, that you're afforded the ability to see beyond your own framework for a moment. It's what psychedelics provide, in a sense. It's what contemplative practices provide. It's for a moment, the way that you see the world broadens, that you see beyond your normal ways of seeing, where there's this connection of different things that are coming in through our emotional states, so they're coming in through our intellect, through our physical practices. And it's in this intersection that something else starts to take shape. We become so intellectual. And there's no aspect of ourselves that doesn't have the capacity to deceive us. Meaning the body has a capacity to deceive us, the intellect has a capacity to deceive us, our emotions definitely have a capacity to deceive us, our fears have a capacity to deceive us. So all of these things have the capacity to deceive us. So going in through just one of these places is not going to be enough. Even if we're just master of our own domain, I'm my own guru, that still has the capacity to deceive us. So having practices that connect these different things, to have something that we can offer people, that they can connect to the ways that they move, that they can get in touch with themselves as in their emotions within community and dialogue, where they get to challenge others' ideas and have their ideas challenged, where they get to understand their physicality, where they get to understand their emotions, where they get to contemplate and read and go into their intellect on their own. And it's in this intersection. There's something powerful when truth starts to intersect across different planes, that it affords us something. We can never fully know the truth because we just know the best that we know now. But let's say that we can move further and further from self-deception and closer to rationality and wisdom and towards the horizon of something that's true. So instead of coming at this psychologically or within a debate, again, bring back ritual in a way that's not only intellectually acceptable, but intellectually responsible to begin this conversation. And that's what I'm doing here with you. And that's what I've been trying to do, to bring in these ideas that this is not like something on the edges of your capacity to believe it. This is well within our capacity to understand its importance if we start to bring in things like cognitive science, like psychology, and bring these things in to make ritual and myth intellectually responsible, and to start to inspire those to take on practices that will put us in the appropriate state to see beyond our current situation. And it's really that grassroots first. We can talk about it from up here, inspire those up here, but really what we're inspiring is individuals, to get individuals within these practices, have them connect again, to be inspired to not only identify themselves with the small island of the them that they know, but the rich ocean that surrounds them, of the they that's mysterious, the they that encompasses things like consciousness, like connection to others, the aspirational self, the relationship between the past self and the future self, and all of these things that we can infuse, and I was going to say infect, actually, to infect like into the very bloodstream of who we are, and have those things come alive. Because what we're doing isn't anything, we're not creating anything that's new. We're trying to translate something inherent and essential about what it is to have a human experience, something that's been put aside and put to sleep. And our words are merely clumsy attempts to get those to look again and to reawaken our connection with that. So coming in at the grassroots place with practices that afford us the cognitive flexibility to be able to sense ourselves in the mythic sense as well as the intellectual sense, to take our modern capacity to understand and reason, and again, to pull those other things forward in a way that's satisfying to our whole being. And I think that's the capacity that needs to happen. It's not going to be easy necessarily, but I think it's going to be like when the kindling is ready, the smallest spark is going to light it. So what we're doing is we're running around with matches, I guess, and trying to find the places where the kindling is ready to light and to spark, because this will be a snowball. It's nothing new that we're trying to bring in within the ecology of practices of Fluidus. We're tapping into something that's been known for a long time to be a part of us. Those scientists at the edges understand what I'm talking about. They understand that we have some idea that someone out there smarter than us knows what consciousness is, knows where we come from, knows what existence is, knows how we think, knows what dreams are. But that is absolutely not true. There's something profound about who we are that's going to forever be mysterious to us. It's almost written within existence itself that what we can do is we're never going to fully wrestle it down into some kind of full understanding. We're going to have to come to terms with a relationship with the mystery. And it's a knowing beyond our capacity to linearly write it down into sentences and be succinct with it. It's an experience that's going to go beyond that, to bring this into our awareness of who we are in a very real way. And that's what Fluidus is, in a sense, and that's what we've been doing to revivify this ecology of practices, to bring this cognitive science aspect, to bring myth and meaning back in a way that it satisfies us, and again, to make it something that we take on, not in something that you do on the side. You said not just a philosophy, and I'd say, well, not just a philosophy as an intellectual exercise, but philosophy as a way of life, of taking these insights and living as if, experimenting with them, taking them on, wrestling with them with each other, where you mentioned things like virtues. Well, where did the virtues come from? Why is love something that's important? Why is selflessness important? Nobody's talking about these things in a real way. Like, why should I care about someone next to me? If survival is the ultimate thing and getting the next best thing is all that it's for, then would selflessness really be a part of that? Like, why is there something that speaks to all of us that doesn't have necessarily a direct connection to my individual survival, but is still important to me? Why is justice a thing that I care about? Why does that touch human beings in a certain way? Like, even to talk about those kinds of things without this connection to something else, to the mythic or to the vivifying of ourselves as more than what we understand. Like, even those things become very flimsy. And that's what we're seeing also.
I'm sitting here and I feel like this incredible, there's this calmness that's come over me. And I'm also smiling because when I sit in a room with you, and this has happened so many times, it feels like the heaviness of the world disappears, in the sense that what you are saying is what you call your philosophy, which is this return to wonder. When you truly think about that, and there's such a lightness that comes with it. There's like this joy, and the usual references to children and how they laugh and how they play, in the sense of innocence, and how they pick up the smallest little thing and study it for hours. You know, it's not about the biggest toy or most colorful object. I mean, they can pick up a piece of sand and just study it and wonder about it. And then an adult's wonder comes in watching them do that. There's just this beautiful process of that being your reminder about that piece of sand. With you, I know that your portal in is through the body, and it's through movement. And, from our own experience of that, it's so true, because you talk about the intellect and the philosophy and the spirit, and all of these things can feel out of reach for many people. But we all have a body. We are all on and of this earth. And I think the other day you said we are between heaven and earth, which is, I thought, another beautiful way of expressing it. You know, only you can describe this the way that you describe it. But what resonated with me is when you speak about how, if you truly look at yourself, I mean, you started this class the other day and you went, what are you dreaming about right now? Who are you? What are you doing? And then, some people were like, I'm sitting, I was thinking about something. Or, others try to be a little bit more profound. And you were like, you are moving your blood in your system and you don't even know. And when you bring in that sense of recognizing what's actually happening, in your words, beyond the surface, beyond the skin, then that changes everything. Because then that sense of wonder is around you all the time. And it's this waking up, and what you kind of call this opportunity that if we actually experienced this for even a millisecond within our systems, it would change everything. And this idea of having such reverence. And I think that when you bring that level of appreciation to this thing we call the body, then I think that everything else can be understood through this vessel.
Very well said. That's our philosophy. It's
I learned from the best.
That's it. It is our most intimate. It's got the possibilities for our most intimate relationship with something, to put words on it, the ground of being, in a sense, where it's, and the stories are softer. I don't have to go through a lot of philosophical acrobatics and go through people's stories and what they identify with and what their religion was and what their backgrounds and what they believe. If I just tell them to, put their hands somewhere or move their arm somewhere, it's the entryway into another is easier in the sense that I can bypass a lot of the stories and get them into that state. There's something really true when we say that reverence is a state that comes with right understanding or with right vision. That when we see something appropriately, reverence is the appropriate state that naturally comes instead of trying to drape reverence over a feeling of not reverence and trying to just look at something and force ourselves to be reverence. Reverence doesn't work like that. Reverence is in a sense an instinct almost. The way that wonder or awe is an instinct. It's if you see something that just drops your mouth open in awe, your body will react instinctually. There'll be piloerection, meaning the little hairs on your arms will stand up. And that's within the autonomic nervous system. You don't have control and can force those little hairs to come up. Something happens beneath the surface when that contact and connection and understanding unveils itself. And the body is an entryway into that. And not only into that place, but it's this beautiful place to challenge the monadic self. So the monadic self is this idea like monomonadic, like that we're one thing, that we're one person, that we're one being or one expression. And it's an interesting idea that we all carry around, but we all know that we're fractured. We all know that we have these beliefs and ideas about the way that we should go through the world. And, we want to be kind and we speak nicely to everybody. And then something happens that pushes the button on the right day in the right circumstance. And we find ourselves screaming or saying things and just standing beside this, looking like, who's that person? What happened to me? It was like a possession that came over me. And then we kill ourselves and, whip ourselves for doing this because we don't understand that we're something closer to, in Jung's word, this collection of autonomous entities outside the control of our linear ego, in a sense, where we're not one thing. We're different languages, we're different states of being, we're different archetypes, we're different levels of understanding, we're different phases of something, and what we're doing at best, the thing that we think of as I, in a sense, is a negotiation or an attempt to organize all of these into some kind of pattern that can move forward in the world. But to come into direct contact with Leviathan, in a sense, with the you, not you, with the other, not other, that coming into the body affords us to do, where we start to realize, well, the I that I think of as I is not in the control of everything that's going on inside me at all. Not within my physical body, not within my psyche, not within my dreams, not within my desires. So there's something much richer and much deeper that's going on inside me. Again, there's the I that I know, and this richness of the I that I don't know. So as the monadic self starts to drop away, we realize that we are multitudes, that the ground of being isn't something out there, but it flows through me. That starts to soften our hold on the story as is, and affords us the capacity to see more than we had seen before. Our story is the prison, whatever cognitive prison we had built for ourselves or had been created for us, that has been there for so long that we stop pressing on the walls to see if they're solid. In these moments where we contact something in us, these, again, I'll go back, transformational experiences, an experience that affords me not just to stay, a little healthier here, but something happens that my stories are no longer sufficient, and there's this insight that allows me to leap beyond my previous framing. Well, now, instead of looking at everything the way that I did, now in a sense, if we want to take this image a little further, now I'm looking at it from a higher place. And now I can see further down the road in both directions. So now my world starts to get bigger. My sense of myself gets bigger. The old stories are flimsier. I may start now to push more into the stories and see what else is not as solid as I thought that was. So this, again, allowing somebody to redirect themselves towards the horizon of wonder, to bring back the question that, well, if I'm not who I thought I was, then what else isn't what I thought it was? And now that begins again. Now we're coming into that sense of instinct, and now we can play within dialogue. Now we can bring in, well, here's what others have been talking about throughout time. Here's what this culture was talking about within the mythic. Here's how they were wrestling. Here's a story that shows what they were wrestling with, how the humans are possessed by the gods, and how to appropriately ration, our relationship with the different gods inside of us, and how to do that in a way that not only affords us a way of being in the world, but starts to satisfy these deeper places in us. And that sense that you have of like the weight of the world, everything was crunching down in me. But then we realize that this relationship with the ground of being, now I'm held, now I'm supported. There's something underneath me and above me, and there's relationships inside me, and there's much more to me than I thought that there was. I'm not this small little thing, stranger in a strange land, alone and afraid. What's out there is in here, and what else? How rich am I? One of the ways to look at this, we think we're two-dimensional, like there's a front and a back, and not a lot in between. So it's not just that we expand our vision of the world to bring wonder back to the world or to re-enchant the world and ourselves, but there starts to be a depth. We start to realize that infinity just doesn't go out there, but it goes inwards also. So the world explodes outwards into something different. And that kind of vision affords us the capacity to change everything.
I'm expanding as I sit here. It's also when this language, of comes in that we're more familiar with now about speaking to the universe and manifestation and synchronicity and these types of things that start to take more like center stage versus kind of happening every now and then or never at all, or only if you push yourself in certain situations or only if you open to it in inverted commas. And when that actually starts to become very integrated into your language and into your life's experience, then it's a lot easier for you to go, I feel the reverence, and then if something dips and that feeling changes or you don't have that same relationship with those experiences happening around you, then, one starts to question if it was real in the first place. So I think what you're saying, and I often feel this, when we have these conversations, is I feel like I tap into the real world of the unreal. And it's such a comfortable place, actually. I mean, it's actually very natural. It's just that we've become so separated from it in a way. And we've often spoken about this idea of silos and how we fragment our lives, which we've touched on already. But the portal through the body truly is the most magical structure and symbolic as well in order to start to reframe that thinking. You spoke about this idea, you gave an example of a surgeon and how we give so much credit to these people with medical degrees that they're the healers of our bodies if we are lucky enough to live long enough or to have an injury healed or a disease healed. I just say that to kind of paint the picture. But what you were saying, which I just found so powerful, is that, well, what happens after they've stitched you up? That is actually when the magic takes place. And we forget about that entirely. We forget that our body then takes over and is doing all the healing. And that's where the mystery happens. And we just have to allow for that mystery because it's inexplicable. And why does it happen to some people and not to other people? And what is disease really? So maybe you can just speak to that.
Sure. Well, it comes from that story that we bought a long time ago, and that background to how we frame everything is still there. And we can try to add new pieces on to an old story, but we don't realize that this is so invasive that even within that story, we still look at ourselves as if we're like a little man or a little woman sitting somewhere in our skull that's driving this machine underneath. And that idea of a clockwork universe, of a mechanical universe, all of these metaphors that have a purpose, that they have some usefulness to them, but they're not true enough to flesh out. So when we look at ourselves, we're seeing ourselves as cars, and a car doesn't fix itself. A car doesn't do anything. You take a car to the mechanic, and the mechanic does its thing. And it's not as if the mechanic does its thing and then you continue to shift and continue the work of the mechanic as you leave. It was the mechanic's job. So we're all walking around with this disconnected sense of ourselves, like this is not I. There's no I position for me to truly inhabit the most intimate aspect of my physical experience, which is my body. And that leaves that story is a big cause of a lot of things. And again, the anxiety, the disconnection, the story of who we are not matching up with the reality of who we are is a big schism. And as far as what disease is, I'm not going to go too deeply into that one because we could spend a lot of time. We could literally take on, the next few, because even that word, we use that word for too many things, let's say. Dis-ease, a sense of not at ease. That could have so many different qualities beneath it, or so many different aspects underneath it. I'll give you something like cancer. Well, cancer in a sense, is cells within us, so part of ourselves that it's forgotten. It's a part of us, in a sense. There's something within cells which is fascinating when you go deep into the biological sciences, that there's some kind of amnesia that happens where the cells, because if not, cells are just doing their things. We're a collection of all these different living things inside of us that are living their individual lives, in a sense, but they're also living for the collective and for the whole at the same time. And if that sense of themselves as completely disconnected, like they're no longer part of something greater. I'm just going to live my cell life as an individual cell and have my individual survival instincts the way that a cell would have. If that starts to take priority over this sense of the cell as connected to other cells, well, they'll just do cell things. They'll continue to divide with no cause or concern to what that division is doing to the other self that they are, that's this connection to this other self. So they'll start to divide, even if that means that they kill the larger self that they are in order to save the little self that they are. So even in that kind of sense of what disease is, there's some kind of story in that. And understanding who we are as this dialectical process, meaning this inward conversation between these entities, these different languages that are somehow cohesive and showing up magically, let's say, within a pattern that somehow you recognize as me. Even though, people that knew me 30 years ago would still recognize me as me, even though not one cell in my body basically would be anything. There'd be nothing left from that other person. Even within my thinking patterns, it'd be so different. But there's something in that pattern that moves forward through space that's familiar. So there's something much more magical to who we are outside of us being machines. And putting someone in touch with that, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a felt sense, a direct experience of it, is something that beyond my willingness to put it within a formula, like if this, then that, but something will shift inside of them. Something will shift and it will be noticeable in the ways that they exist, the way that they feel in their bodies, the things that they will start to take on and do for themselves. The ways that they will hold themselves will begin to shift and change. The decisions they will make will shift and change. Where they set their eyes, where they aim themselves, all of those things will shift and change. So in a very real way, they will never be the same again, and the world will never be the same again. And I'd like to go back a little bit on something that you said before about having these practices and manifestation and mantras and positive affirmations and all of these things that we put these on, and our language starts to change because again we're trying to satisfy that ache inside of us for something other than what we're seeing around. Something isn't satisfied by that, and we try to put these, I'd say in a sense, these disconnected practices, this kind of like hodgepodge of like you do a little bit of this and you do a little bit of this and you do this because we all know that there's something apart from what we can see. But if it's not satisfying intellectually, if there's something in me that can't buy into it fully, then as soon as I go out into the world and something starts to happen, that other part is going to come up and push down that little tiny inspiration of maybe some of this stuff might be real because I don't know everything, and that other part will just quash this part because it's there's not enough there. I can't remember if it was Plato or Socrates says that we have two drives. One is the drive for some kind of contentment or inner peace, and the other drive is the drive to know that what's bringing us contentment or inner peace is real. Like there's a reality to it. There's an ache in us also, not just for the inner peace, but for a relationship with you, your words, the really real, like a normative ontology. Like it's not just good enough to have pretty stories that seem to satisfy that stuff and go around acting as if. even if I could snap my fingers and tell you, well, what if I just hypnotized you forever and you believed all this stuff and you go through life completely happy and full of wonder? Most people would deny that because there's something in us beyond our capacity to flesh it out and label it that wants a relationship with some kind of divine reality, some kind of reality out there. And there's something in us that's trying to commune with the really real. That's why these documentaries and, you know, these scientific stuff, the Science Channel, it's because we want to know. We want to know, what is this that I'm in? Like, how do I contact the really real? So it's not enough for these disjuncted practices that speak to something and like mantras that you just, you know, sit there and you say it enough times and hopefully, or you want it to be real, so you go out and you do your best to act as if. It's what fundamentalists are. That's what they're doing. It's not fully satisfying them. There's something inside of them that doubts what they're doing. So it's a desperate attempt that if I can proselytize to others and convert others, then maybe that voice of doubt inside me will soften. It's not, this is subconscious, but it's what's going on, which is why it's so devastating when you challenge the beliefs of someone that's fundamentalist, whether in traditional religion or in some of the New Age stuff, and you'll just see them you just see them tighten immediately, and this defensive posture comes in because there's like, no, like if you, like, this is flimsy enough already. If we start to tap dance on it, like, it might crumble underneath me. So there's a constant anxiety under any kind of fundamentalist practice. It's almost the opposite of what you're talking about this feeling of the weight being lifted when there's an intersection of truth from multiple planes that's satisfying to me, that satisfies me, that I don't have to bend over backwards and put my fingers in my ears and la 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 and not listen to other things because it might go away. Like, we're trying to come at this in a way that is satisfying, that it can be wrestled with, that you can kick it around. That, I mean, most of the theory around this is that Plato wasn't a name. Plato was a nickname. It was a wrestling nickname given to this figure. And Plato means broad shoulders because Plato was a wrestler. So think about that. One of the fathers of at least Western philosophy, and its tendrils into other things, was a wrestler, meaning someone that would grapple with what existence is, grapple with truth, wrestle with it, like try to bring it down, push against it, have it push back against him in the most intimate way. Like, that kind of push and pull of a wrestling is an intimate connection. It's not this fragility where it's like, don't touch it or it might fall apart. And we're all walking around, even those of us that have ideas of spirit, but it's this tiny little thing within this other world that we hold as the really real, and we're trying to protect this tiny little bit of inspiration of spirit because nobody touch it, please. You know, nobody touch it because I don't want it to fall apart, and there's something that in me that needs this, but it's flimsy and it's wrapped in anxiety. So can we change that?
Sure. That is fascinating also about Plato, because his experience of his philosophy was through his body. Yeah. Which is exactly what you're saying.
It always has to be.
It has to be. It absolutely has to be.
We're embodied creatures. I mean, even if you see me talking, I'm not talking. It's this, and I'm talking about wrestling, and I'm talking about dragging something down. It's literal. It's one of the issues that they're finding out with AI, that it's been so difficult for them to deal with artificial intelligence, and it's something that's come into notice in the last years, is that it's impossible to have artificial intelligence without being embodied. So they're actually having to create robot bodies in order for artificial intelligence to take the next step, because we move through this world with a body. We think through our bodies. It's impossible. Even our stuff like grasping an idea, you know, being in touch with reality. All our metaphors are
having a gut feeling.
Having a gut feeling. Yes, all of these, seeing clearly. You know, this thing, you know, all of these things, it's impossible
Music
for us to
to my
think.
ears. I can go on, don't get me started.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to pause that AI conversation for a second because it's quite fascinating. But I was thinking as you were speaking how we've actually become incredibly helpless with all the knowledge and information that we have in a world of specialization where we are outsourcing our health and so many other things to people who we think know better. We have dumbed ourselves down. We have become helpless, and we don't know how to do the things that should be incredibly innate, like healing. I've been through an interesting health journey over the last few years. Nothing serious, but just very challenging shifts and changes related to different places that I'd visited, or things happening in my mouth related to teeth, and then seeing how that whole thing affects all different parts of your body. And then I came to your class recently and you were speaking about the lymph system, which is so powerful. And I started doing a lot of those exercises that we were doing. And I noticed such an immediate shift. And when you have tools like these that really, again, should be just so available, then you start to take back your power in such a profound way and realize it's in that moment that you go, my body is doing what it's actually meant to be doing. It had just kind of gone off course because I listened to this person and they said I should do this. And then someone else said, take 500 supplements and then whatever it is. And then there was just this noise that started to happen internally and then express itself in a way that said, this isn't working for me. And however they came out through layers of discomfort and a process of time in order, to teach. Literally, your body becomes your teacher. And that can happen in a way, if you don't listen, that it can have very negative repercussions. But if you start to listen and start to apply tools at a very basic level, and again, as you're saying, you do have to intellectualize it because you have to understand the workings of your inner body in order to make these applications. Part of it is where that mystery actually starts to be understood in a way that definitely is deserving this quality of reverence, but at the same time, leaving the rest to just do what it needs to do without having to understand that. And that's been my own direct experience. And I know many other people, it's oftentimes when you get to a point of just, I don't know what to do anymore, that you just surrender into letting the body do what it needs to do and to stop with all the kind of force, I should say, forcing it to be better or forcing it to be different. Your processes are so inspiring. Maybe you can just share with the audience. You speak about lymph touch maps, the dams, organ resets, the mystic eyes, the vagus nerve resets, and fascia, which I actually just think is just next level, off the charts, and how that shapes us. I mean, just on that note, you gave us this incredible example where you said, you used Michael Phelps actually as the example, and you said how his body had been shaped into the shape of a dolphin because it completely, it's morphed, I should say, into the shape of a dolphin because that is what he loves. He loves swimming. In order for him to be the best swimmer in the world, he needs to perform in a particular way. And this is the shape that he's adapted to that will enable that performance. And there are many other examples of that. And despite the pain that he actually has to go through with this unnatural shape, it's something that he's prepared to sacrifice. I was saying that, this modern lifestyle has created a very sedentary positioning for all of us behind a car, at a table, eating, sitting, at your computer, and with very little movement in between. And so it's no wonder that people are walking around with such bad postures or breathing problems. The list goes on. So maybe you can share some of those techniques with us.
Even listening to you, there's this part of me that cringes with anatomical language. And again, these are leftovers from this idea of us as mechanisms and reductionists and something dead out there that we need to do something onto. So we do our best, and the language that we've come up with, there's a way, because we live in a tyranny of words. So when I say something to you, you're going to go to your internal dictionary and translate the words that I'm saying based on your experiences and the story and your upbringing and your culture and what you've been told and what you believe. So we may think that we're talking about the same things. We may not actually be talking about the same things. I may be saying a word that signifies something to me and it signifies something different to you. And we mistake the symbol for what it's trying to encompass, in a sense. Like we reduce the world, we iron out a wiggly world, in Alan Watts' words, into something that's flat, and bringing these dead bones, no pun, well, I guess it's a little bit of a pun intended, these dead bones of anatomical language, and we're bringing them forward. And when we use them, people already have emotions around their understanding of what anatomy is. Most people that you ask about anatomy are going to have a very kind of like, ugh, reaction to that. It's a boring subject. The way that it's been done, it's this boring, memorizing subject. And that's already in there when we start to talk about quote unquote anatomy or the inner world. So we do our best to change the language, because in order to change the way that we see things, we need to play with language. There's no way around that. We need to play with language. So we do our best to speak, and I'll tell people that I'm speaking from two places. One is, the dead bones of anatomy, and there's a usefulness there, because within that we get to know what we're talking about. We get to parse out this continuous world into pieces that we can bring together. But then we add other things like fascia is the living internal spider web. The lymphatic system and the vascular system are the inner rivers, the living rivers. So it's going from both. It's going from the objective materialist reductionist language and from this more mythic poetic language, in a sense. So you could think about it in this real sense of bringing simplistic, but the left hemispheres and the right hemispheres of us together, where the right hemisphere is the one that has this all-encompassing view of the world, and the left hemisphere, which is this reducing of the world, this filtering out of the world in a way that we can speak about it. But to be able to go from both of those places, talking about the lymphatics as the inner rivers, the intellect, okay, the lymphatic system, here's what the lymphatic system is, here's when it can get blocked off, here's what the symptoms of this would be, more anxiety because it's wrapped up with your nervous system. There's going to be less freedom of movement because wherever your lymphatic systems are blocked off, we tend to stop moving in those places. Less overall health because we're going to be more toxic within our bodies. These kinds of things are all real and intellectual, but also this other sense of what happens when you start to free the movement of, the inner forest in you. When you start to, like a spirit of the forest or a guardian of the forest, a tender of the garden, like go in there and start to touch into these places and open the dams in your river. And the feeling of those two things is very different. They're both happening at the same time. But again, this attempt to bridge, and it's not like, this does not afford us the actual experience of what it's like to feel ourselves from the inside. This is outward symbols and images and small mouse sounds and, characters on a piece of paper that give us an intellectual, disconnected idea, which is valuable. But what it feels like inside of ourselves when we start to touch into these places and we feel the movement and we sense the richness of our world, that's also true. It's phenomenologically true. So the sense of ourselves as an inner land, as a territory, as a tribe of autonomous entities and languages that are speaking and communicating inside of ourselves, that's phenomenologically true. So to bridge these two things together is something that's necessary for a fuller understanding and sense of who we are, and a way to move through our inner worlds and outer worlds in a way that is more complete and makes us feel more full. So bringing these two things together in the languages that we do, and the fascial system showing this co-creation with the world in a sense, where it's consciousness and gravity, it's the inner and the outer, and within that conversation where the intention of what we do shapes how we move forward through the world, that kind of thing, where there's this bridging there, even within the language of that, of moving the fascia in a way to, again, tend to this garden, to bring intention, movement, the outer and the inner together.
That integration of what you're talking about is actually a map for living your life. This connection and this connectivity really describes what we've been speaking about the whole time. And those connections start to spark only when you do this multiple times, because it's the felt experiences happen over time because you're still releasing your old experiences even in your cellular memory. This is, I can't find the language, isn't that appropriate?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Can I play off of what you just said there a little bit?
Yes.
What you're saying is so beautiful. We can bring this back into the ritual. Before I say that, you mentioned map, and there's something about a map, and it's within the practices that we offer and that we share, there's something about making them just vague enough. You want to give enough direction to have someone go into the land, to find the doorway, let's say, but not so specific that they get enamored and lost in the map. The map becomes opaque in a sense, and you can't see through the map into the territory that it's pointing out. So there's this play, again, between the known and the unknown, the understood and the mysterious, where we want the language that we use, the entryway, to be not too specific, because that specific, if it's too specific, it'll take away the direct experience of the moment, that really the gold is there. I wanted to play off of that a bit. Silence is something that's beautiful, and we don't do it enough, I think. The integration and the capacity to move through our world with that sense of quiet and ease and silence is something that we don't honor that enough. Yeah, go ahead. I'll leave that there for you.
Well, another kind of transmuting, would that be the word, ever-changing way of describing what you do is spatial medicine. And in the work that I am hoping to do more of is this idea of, I suppose one could call it, capturing holism in space. I'm still playing with how one creates that, because it's a very hard understanding for people to associate with when they're so used to these boxes, these concrete walls with very little light coming in and very little option for movability in a way that is natural and fluid. So it's about creating spaces where nature is very much part of that process to allow breathing. And I think about it as, how does one mimic the body in the way that they create space? And how does that enhance healing? And all the qualities that one gets through the experience of one's body, how can that be achieved in space? And the easiest way of looking at it is just going to nature. That does everything for you. It literally resets you, gives you life. You breathe into it, it breathes into you. There's just so many qualities. And it's kind of conversation that I'm embarking on, is to get this dialogue going between what I call the human nature print versus this idea of a blueprint. So I just thought maybe you can share, and we have had these conversations before, around how you feel one's spatial environment can influence the way one moves through the spaces that we call house, home, office, street, urban center.
I'm gonna play off something they said earlier, and then we'll take on the environment and individual and how to play with that. But something that you said a few moments ago was that this transformation isn't necessarily this deeper sense. And it doesn't take time in the sense that it takes a lot of time to feel it at first. But this is, in a sense, is the kind of work that we do is, in a sense, work that precedes understanding. Meaning the work comes first, and the understanding, the intellectual understanding, will flower or unfold over time. There's that to be said about it. I think this is an appropriate place to speak again about, you can change the word if you like, if there's strong connotations with it, but the sense of ritual. And ritual is something that you do whether or not you feel it that day, if that makes sense. It's not like, well, today I feel like doing this, so I do. It was this sense of, there's this commitment to something that's meaningful to you, that's done every day. Like we talked about opening the rivers of the lymphatics. That's a ritual. That's within the ritual of our practices, that you do that every day. And there's certain practices that you do every day. And these ritual has this capacity to, first you fit yourself into the ritual, but then the ritual allows you to fit the world to yourself, in a sense. So there's this interplay with, you go into the ritual, but the ritual affords you a different understanding of yourself, which makes the world look different, which changes you. And then from that understanding, you go into the ritual a little bit differently, and then the ritual works on you again. And then there's this interplay that starts to happen from these moments, these consistent practices that we do, that changes the way that we see ourselves and see things, which affords us the world to be different. And then we make the world different because now we're different. And now since the world is different, the world changes us a bit. And now this different person goes back into the ritual, and you kind of see how this starts to snowball, in a sense, and move through itself. And ourselves in the environment, it's the same thing. There's a co-creation there. We shape our environment, and then the environment shapes us back. So we're doing this co-creation constantly. So you see, it's this idea of like brutal architecture, like how we didn't quite understand the connections of what we were doing when that happened, because within this brutal architecture, that brutal architecture was changing something in us. And then as that something changed in us, that means that our impact on the outer world was going to be different. And then as that impact became different, then the world changed us. So now it's, again, the snowball in the other direction of how we shape our environment. We're shaped by this new environment that we're making. And from our new understanding or our anxieties from within that, we're shaping the environment more. So we've come on this path. Again, now we're moving in the horizontal. So the question is, again, like, how do we shift out of the horizontal? How do we create situations where there's the possibility for transformation that affords us, again, a leap outside of our current framing to see things differently? So we shape our environment in a different way, so our environment can shape us in a different way. Because one of the things that you said about nature does everything, and I'm like, well, depends on how you look at it.
It can be destructive.
Can
Absolutely.
be destructive. If a contractor goes out there whose lenses and whose frame that's been built and become opaque over his or her eyes is the sense of just looking for land to build more, building projects that are just going to be as many as possible in the smallest space as possible to make as much money as possible, then that person could go out into nature, and that transformative quality of what nature is not available to this person because they're only looking at it from the horizontal that they're currently in. So all of us, in a sense, need this capacity. It's not going to be an intellectual only exercise. It's going to have to be a set of practices or experiences. And one of the things that I do within these conversations, Pascal said something beautiful. So Pascal, philosopher, he was trying to explain to people the importance of touching into these other worlds inside of themselves. And he would go through these beautiful logical arguments over and over. But at the end of all this precise, beautiful logical language, he would say, all of my arguments are just to get you to go to light a candle. Like basically all of this is a finger pointing at the moon, and all I'm trying to get you to do is go in there and explore the experience, because it's within the experiences that something beautiful is going to happen. All the other words are just my attempt to convince you to go into those worlds for yourself where the real transformation is going to happen. So again, I'll continue to do these talks to, if I'm sitting down with scientists, I'll be talking much more like a cognitive scientist and like an embryologist and, an anatomist. But again, it's in the back of my mind, it's these words are to try to get you to go light a candle, to try to make these experiences intellectually respectable and responsible. So people will go into these places for themselves where it no longer becomes, well, do you believe me or not? That becomes more and more irrelevant. If once you experience it, no matter is a sense of, do you believe me? Now it starts to be a sense where you're starting to understand how to listen to your mind, to your body, to be able to look at your lenses, to understand the richness of the world, to go out and look at nature in a different way. And I think changing the spaces in which we do things has the capacity to be that kind of transformational quality. We're so sensitive to this, which is, it's got two double-sided sword in a sense, because we're so sensitive to this. There's a famous research experiment where they had two groups go into a room, and a certain room, and they gave them some information to study, and both groups studied it for about the same amount of time, and then they let both groups go. And then the next day, they brought both groups back. One group, they brought back to exactly the same room that they were in before. And the other group, they took them to another place. They tested both groups on the information. The group that was within the place that they were in before, where they learned the information, that group did 10 times, it's not actually 10 times, but they did much, much better than the group that was taken to another place. It means that our environment, our orientation in space has a massive impact on how we receive information and how we see the world. So just shifting and playing with that, it's one of those ways possibly to get ourselves out of the horizontal and to give us the possibility for this kind of leap into the vertical. It'll at least soften the story. Even just something different, putting people into different places instead of the foregone, four walls kind of place that we are, that we normally try to understand ourselves in the world through. And doing something like bringing nature into that is going to be massively impactful, I think.
And also, energy. I mean, you speak about how they moved off to a different venue because possibly the energy changed within that experience, which could have been affected by X, Y, and Z of whatever was in the space or its orientation. Or I mean, these are ancient practices. Of course, we can label them as feng shui or the like. But one cannot discount that all of these things play a role and how that has been taken over by the economies of scale in order to produce something that will just do. I just found that an interesting connection. It's not just that it's interesting, it's actually an imperative connection between the body and nature and the infrastructure that we create to put ourselves in. Just on a more personal note, what is a day in the life of Carlos? What goes into your body? What's your movement practice like? Who is your inspiration? What is an average day like for you? Because obviously, I know that you walk your talk, and I think that you stand out, for obvious reasons. I mean, if you look at Carlos, he is adorned in tattoos all over. You walk barefoot. You are not a direct reflection of how our society is right now in this world. So I always think of you as otherworldly, in a sense. Do you have that sense of yourself? And is it designed that way? Or is it just not even a construct and it's just like, this is how I am? So how does that all fit in?
I don't think it was a construct on purpose, in a sense. There was something in me that enjoys the things that I do in a very, I don't want to say superficial. I don't think any of it is superficial. But in a sense, it wasn't premeditated and sat down and decided how I was going to stand out and be different. It's not like that. But I do get that sense of it. And at this point, it's extremely useful to me because of that, because it affords me the capacity to not get too lost in the way things are as of now. And it allows me to have one foot in either world. So that sense of the bridge. And again, a lot of this is something that I'm looking back now and trying to make sense of why I've made some of the decisions that I've made. Because there's, again, I don't get to be outside of this in the sense of like there's the I that I know and then the I position that's mysterious even to me. And I'm trying to make sense of some of the things that are meaningful and directions that are being taken from within myself and trying to be like, well, why did I do that? Or why, because I like it. Well, okay, that's because I like it says something, but does it say everything? There's something that feels deeper than just I like it. It's easier for me to think if I didn't have those things, I would want something else to separate. It's almost like this. It feels like I'm at a door and I'm trying to stay at the door so I can hold it open, if that makes sense. So again, that sense of the bridge, of not going fully into the other world and not being lost in this one, but somehow trying to bring both of them together. And I think in a way I'm kind of a paradox also. I like that aspect of it where, someone sees me, they're going to expect something else and they're probably not going to expect the kind of speaking that I do, or they're going to expect me to be just not as cynical as I am necessarily, or not as thoughtful or willing to challenge practices and ideas, even if they're my own, as deeply as I do. So those things are helpful, especially when we're talking about practices that glitch the matrix for a moment, that people can't quite go to where they're used to going to for that moment, that sense of these micro transformational experiences where I can't answer this, I can't deal with this from here, I've got to come to a different state of understanding to be able to deal with this person or what's being presented to me at this moment. So in that sense, that's helpful. That's helpful. It's useful. I don't think that I went out because it was useful. It was more kind of inspiration. And then afterwards, like, well, why did I just do that? Like, why was that so meaningful to me beyond my capacity to understand why that was so meaningful to me? So those things are helpful in that way. What else did you ask?
I think because even when I look at you and when you speak, you're absolutely right. It is a reminder. It is a doorway because it is not the norm. So maybe, in the Amazon jungle or the Maori or where there's tribal, that's their tradition. So in that case, if someone walked in, for example, without tattoos on their face, that would be what is not normal within that societal paradigm. So I think for me, when I see you, and now you're so familiar in a beautiful way, it actually switches my way of thinking immediately. So there's a connection I'm able to make just through a visual reference and know that whether it's like there's a reference to Pixie or some kind of mythological denim-clad character. And then when you start speaking, it then again is that verbal mirroring of what is presented on the surface, which once again is this is not going to be a normal, in inverted commas, conversation. And I'm so excited about that. Mm-hmm. That's my sense.
I think part of it, and again, this is me trying to reverse engineer what happened, but it seems now that there was, again, something in me that was like, in a sense, not trusting the other parts of me to not kind of give up and go back to the way things were. And this was like a line in the sand of like, well, we can't go back the way we came. So the only way is forward from this moment on. So some of the things, especially the tattoos on the face, is a mark that won't go away of the commitment to this journey and this quest, and they're not letting it go until we move it forward somehow. I think that's part of it too. At least that's me trying to make sense of it from this seat now.
Yeah. Well, in another way, just like you can't unknow what you now know.
Yeah.
It's this knowing. Yeah. And that is your representation of this knowing, which everyone else is then has to create whatever they decide to do, whether that's just an internal acknowledgement of it or whether there's some kind of reference in another way in their lives. Mm-hmm. But it really is, well, thank you. I don't know. It's just, it's kind of like, it's just made me aware of quite a few things. So just a day in the life of Carlos. Carlos Tao, by the way. Well, the way.
That changes. We travel so much. We travel a lot. So I was going to say I laugh and say this, but it's actually true that I haven't unpacked a suitcase fully. I think I did it once. I have a memory of possibly doing it a few months ago for the first time in like 5 years of fully unpacking my suitcase. So basically my suitcase is my closet.
Filled with skeletons, literally, as in the suitcase, not the closet.
Yeah, one suitcase is just books, and the other suitcase is my clothing and my other things. Devin, my wife, she does unpack. She doesn't understand how I do that, but usually the places that we stay in are small, so there's usually one tiny closet, so she gets the closet, and my suitcase is my closet. But we travel a lot, so it makes something like ritual very important in that sense, because when you travel around enough, if you've done this before, sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you're not sure which side of the bed you're on and where the bathroom is, and you're just completely shaken a bit until you land and you settle. But these other things, and my practice isn't, especially my movement practice, I don't do an hour and a half yoga class every day or anything like that. Again, there's multi-layers. It's difficult for me to just pick one layer. One layer is well, it's for health and for well-being and all these things. But on the other sense, it's these ritual practices that afford us access through the portal into the really real, into the normative ontology of the vertical, to not get lost within the horizontal. So these daily practices, these rituals are multi-layered. One, releasing the lymphatics, great for your health. Working on the fascia, also for your health and for movement and mobility and stress and all of those things. It's really the layer above or below that, however you want to place it, of this religio in its deeper sense beyond the traditional religion. This binding to appropriately set ourselves daily into the right proportion between the mystery and the known, between the I that I know here, between my personality and the depth of myself beyond that, and these rituals that afford us the capacity for reverence, that right seeing, where the world now is seen in a different way. So in that sense, there's every morning there's some of the touch and opening the rivers, there's some work with breath, there's some deeper touch, there's some contemplation, and there's some movement, because again, it's an ecology of practices. So it's not just affecting or accessing one aspect, but it's how do we intersect these different aspects of ourselves in this movement away from self-deception and towards rationality and wisdom in order to move through the day. Philosophy, again, as a way of life, not just a philosophy as an intellectual exercise, but a way to move forward and constantly place myself within the world in this transframed world and this transframed reality beyond the previous framing. So those practices will be there every day. Someday I play more, I practice more. But again, we teach so much. Like for a week, I'll be waking up at 6 a.m. just to teach for 8 hours, 9 hours. That doesn't afford me a lot of time for long physical practices. But the ways that we teach movement and even philosophy have this meta quality about them. And meta in a sense that it extends, it ripples outwards in the same way that a ritual does, where it's not just, it's good for the purpose of the ritual, or, it's good for the purpose of that movement class or that posture, whatever it is. These things extend outwards. So it starts to affect the ways that we move through the world and in our bodies much more than just the movement from within that one practice. So even doing it in a condensed way has this quality of keeping us mobile and free and balanced, let's say.
And are you very conscious about what goes into your body in terms of...
No. No's not the right answer. I think that becomes less and less important the more... When you start to connect more and more to your body, your cravings and what your body needs actually start to align more, if that makes sense. So what you crave will tell you what you need. So it no longer has to be as much of an intellectual exercise. That takes time.
Of course.
To develop that kind of understanding and play with the body takes time. There's certain things that I do. Like if I'm hungry, I eat. If I'm not hungry in the morning, I don't try to force myself into 3 to 4 meals a day just because that's a nice intellectual thing to do. So in that sense, I'm sort of careful, but it's much more from the sense of the work that we do or the connections we do with our bodies in other places affords this deeper listening to it. It's not that I don't, like I'm morally against sweets. It's just not a big part. I don't like chocolate. Coffee's not a thing that I've ever liked. So in a sense, I'm lucky in those purposes.
Me too, except the chocolate, but I don't think that's unlucky.
I know. People keep saying, "No, you can develop a taste for it." I'm like, there's so many things I like already. I don't
exactly.
I don't need to work towards developing a taste for more things. Yeah, but no, I don't consciously sit down there and have a strict diet by any stretch of the imagination.
Completely makes sense. Your body is your informant.
Yeah,
and you listen to it.
Yeah, and then also on the other stage, when you're working with the body within the systems of the body and the filtration systems of the body, your body is much more resilient and can handle to filter out what doesn't need to be there in a much more functional way. So it becomes less important. I'm not going to say not important, but it becomes less important to micromanage everything you put in your body if the systems of your body are able to filter properly.
Enough said. I get it. That's perfect. This is like the never-ending story, which is beautiful, and it kind of opens us up for many more conversations down the line, because I think when I saw you last was possibly a year or so ago, and what you presented this time around was completely new iteration of saying the same thing, if that makes sense, and saying new things. And it's just, I just want to thank you, not only for today, but I knew that this was going to be surreal, but for coming into my world. I honestly feel that my life has been transformed, my body, my movement and my health has reformed, and that my outlook, which is akin to yours, has been seen and met and up-leveled, actually. Thank you for continuing to remind me when I forget, and for bringing a constant refining and freshness to this invaluable work that you do. It's always with humility, it's always with reverence, and it's always with a sense of play and fun and joy. So you're a blessing and you're a godsend, and it's a deep honor knowing you and sharing a friendship with you. So thank you from every little happy cell in my body, and possibly the unhappy ones too, but they're soon to be a lot more balanced. And though the timing didn't work out this time round for rooftop retreats, we're definitely putting a date in the diary for the next time that you're here, because I want to spread this magic that you do so well. So thank you very, very much. And I just wish you blessings on your way.
Thank you. I look forward to our next conversations. I do believe there's a lot more to unpack, and I look forward to spending more time here and rooftop retreats and continuing to bring others into this conversation, and to creating an answer together to the meaning crisis and to our sense of wonder and the communal re-enchantment of our world. So thank you.
We're brought to you today by The Real Thing. I've used The Real Thing since inception because, like me, they believe holistic health is accessible and sustainable. That's why every ingredient in every one of their products is delivered at optimal concentration for real health benefits. Their all-natural products are purified to eliminate toxins, microorganisms, and contaminants. They're MCC approved and free of colorants, flavorants, preservatives, binders, fillers, tableting aids, and any other additives that might dilute or compromise the good stuff. That's what makes them the real thing. They're available in most local pharmacies and health food stores in South Africa and also have an online presence at therealthing.co.za. Thanks for listening. We really enjoyed our conversation together. So please watch the space for more inspiring conversations with phenomenal humans and support us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We'd also love you to follow us at 360.degreeshuman on Instagram. To learn more about today's guest, including links and resources related to our conversation, go to the episode page at 360degreeshuman.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter. If you live in Cape Town or are visiting, we'd love to see you at our next rooftop retreats. It's a midweek, mid-month, holistic urban mini retreat and pop-up experience on rotating city rooftops, inspiring you to live whole. You can find us on Instagram at rooftop_retreats or on Facebook/rooftop retreats. If you'd like us to curate and host a bespoke rooftop retreat, please get in touch with us. Special thanks to our technical team from Edible Audio, with original music by Daniel Eppel, sound engineering by Alex Smiley and Mamani Sambo. I look forward to sharing our next episode with you soon, so watch the space. Till then, live whole.